What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, Week 10 wide receiver starts and sits, and we're going to go matchup by matchup, and we'll let you know which receivers are poised for a good game and which ones you should probably leave on the bench. If by the end of this video you're still unsure which receiver to start, utilize the rankings available on our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. The link for that is in the description box below, but we have a lot of matchups to go over, so we'll just jump right into it. The first matchup we have is the Chicago Bears versus the Detroit Lions. And on the Chicago side of things, you have Allen Robinson, who's been playing pretty well. He's going to be ranked as a back-end wide receiver 1 this week in what should be a good matchup. The Detroit Lions, they rank 24th in passing DVOA, so they're definitely giving it up through the air. This game also has a 42-point over-under. Chicago's at home, expected to win by 2.5, but that's still pretty large for a game against Chicago. Typically, those games, they're projected to be much lower scoring, so there's a chance that Detroit does push for Chicago to have to score more points, and that's going to immediately benefit a player like Allen Robinson. On the other side of the ball, Marvin Jones had another good game last week, 10 targets versus Oakland. You always have to be wary with Marvin Jones though, because every time he starts to get hot like this, that's when he is in line for another dud. We do still have him ranked inside the top 20 though, so if you do have Marvin Jones, do try to get him in the lineup. Kenny Golladay, he's a back-end wide receiver 1 as well, which just leaves Danny Amendola, who for desperate owners, he could be put in. However, you know you're taking on a lot of risk by relying on him, so nothing more than a flex if you do end up getting him into your lineup. But that's about it for that matchup, so we'll move on to the next one, which is the Baltimore Ravens versus the Cincinnati Bengals. This is going to be a Cincinnati home game with a 44.5 point projected point total. If we're starting with the Ravens, you got two players, Mark Andrews, Marquise Brown. Keep in mind with Marquise Brown, he's still recovering from his injury. Last week against the Patriots, he only played on 58% of snaps. While on the field, he caught 3 of 4 passes for 48 yards, but that was against the Patriots, a very tough passing defense to say the least. Presumably, he's going to be healthier this week, but we still can't mark him as a locked and loaded play. He's definitely going to get a bump down in the rankings, which actually lands him as a wide receiver 3 this week. And considering the type of player that he is more boom or bust, you're going to feel much more comfortable putting him in as the flex than you would be relying on him as a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 in your lineup. Mark Andrews, he's a start. He's coming off back-to-back underwhelming performances, combining for just 4 receptions for 60 yards in his last 2 contests. But in the tight end landscape, you don't really get a bunch of consistency and high-end production, and he's still on pace for just under 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. So if you have him, you're putting him in. Not much more to say other than that. On the Bengals side of things, AJ Green, he had a setback. He's out for an undisclosed amount of time, likely indefinitely. That leaves Auden Tate and Tyler Boyd to handle most of the work in the receiving game. While Baltimore definitely hasn't been as strong as in years past when it comes to a defensive standpoint, it's tough to see either Tyler Boyd or Auden Tate having a spectacular game, so they're taking a dip in the rankings. They've performed poorly in much better matchups. We have both of them ranked outside of wide receiver 3 territory, so that's right. They're going to be flexes at best this week, so if you have better options, likely put those in over these two, because we're really not expecting much, to be quite honest with you. Up next, we have the Buffalo Bills versus the Cleveland Browns. Browns are expected to win this game. They're at home. It's got a 40-point projected point total. For the Browns side, Odell Beckham, he is certainly a start this week. You can start him as a high-end wide receiver too. It is a much softer matchup for a player like Jarvis Landry, who's playing out of the slot, and we have seen in previous matchups, Buffalo does allow those short to intermediate passes while they beat up on the guys playing from the outside. So someone like Jarvis Landry could have a good game. We still have him ranked as a back-end wide receiver 3, so it's not as if we're expecting too much. However, that is higher than his usual ranking. For Buffalo, you have John Brown. Cole Beasley we could mention as well. For Brown, he's going to be a top 20 option. Buffalo, they are slight underdogs, so is game script in which they're passing late in the fourth quarter is possible, in which case that would allow John Brown to have a little bit more volume than he would typically in a normal matchup. His targets, they've been pretty consistent. His catch rate, it's solid, so feel confident putting him in as a wide receiver 2 this week with a decent floor as well. Cole Beasley, the only reason I'm mentioning him, he has had back-to-back weeks with a touchdown. Just keep in mind last week he only had 2 targets. Yes, one was a touchdown, but if you're relying on that type of production, eventually it's going to come back to bite you. So we would definitely recommend to leave him on the bench, but considering he has produced in back-to-back matchups, it is worth bringing him up. With that though, we're going to move into the next one, which is the Kansas City Chiefs against the Tennessee Titans, and this is going to be the return of Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes will be on the road facing the Titans in what should be a 49.5 point projected point total, with Kansas City expected to win by 6. All reports have Patrick Mahomes as healthy, which is going to be an immediate bump to all of the passing weapons in this offense. Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, both their floors and ceilings are going to increase, so you want to make sure to get him in this week, especially if you've been leaving him on the bench the past couple of weeks. For Tyreek Hill, we have him as a top 5 option. Tennessee has not looked all that great when it comes to stopping the pass recently. They were a top 12 passing defense, and they've been trending down ever since. And Patrick Mahomes coming back after the injury, you know he's going to want to put on a show. You know he's going to want to show the fans that he's healthy, so you can definitely expect big things this week. So that just leaves Sammy Watkins, who's coming off of a 10-target performance. Unfortunately, he only translated that into about 63 receiving yards, but against the Minnesota Vikings, that's not a bad total at all. With Patrick Mahomes likely back, he's going to have a much higher ceiling as well, but he's going to be more in the wide receiver 3 range and someone who carries a bit more risk than the other two. For the Titans, Ryan Tannehill has been an upgrade, no denying that, but with that, it's still tough to trust any of these receivers on the offense. The ball's been spread around pretty well. Corey Davis, AJ Brown, those are going to be your 2 guys who you're mainly focusing on. Neither one of them should be started as more than a flex, and even in a game in which they should be trailing late in the 4th quarter with a high projected point total, putting your money on either one of these 2 is going to carry a significant amount of risk, even in what should be a solid matchup for the 2 receivers. New Orleans Saints versus the Atlanta Falcons. This game has the 2nd highest projected point total. You have the Saints at home. It's in the Superdome. Saints are massive favorites in this one, 13.5 points, which means a lot of garbage time projected for the Falcons. One thing to be aware of though, the New Orleans Saints defense is no joke. They've been performing much better against the pass. So while Julio Jones is still a marquee wide receiver 1, it's not like Calvin Ridley gets a massive boost himself. He's still going to be in that back end wide receiver 2 range, high end wide receiver 3 range with a bit of volatility. Austin Hooper is going to be a top 5 option, and then you have Russell Gage, who looks to be taking over the snaps when it comes to Mohamed Sanu's lost production. He's not ranked as anywhere near a starter, but just somebody to keep an eye on. For New Orleans, Michael Thomas is the number 1 ranked wide receiver on the week and should be in line for a spectacular performance. Definitely don't overthink this one. There's also opportunities for other receivers to perform well in this game as well. There's no way we can really recommend starting any of them, but a player like Ted Ginn, he does have an opportunity to have a good game. Jared Cook, now that he's returned, he has some upside, but realistically, the only one you can really trust is going to be Michael Thomas. The rest are really going to be dart throws, but in a thin TE landscape, someone like Jared Cook, he does provide the upside for us to feel comfortable starting him in the lineup if you don't have any better option. New York Giants versus New York Jets. I'd be lying if I said this one was going to be exciting. Darnold's looked absolutely terrible at this point, so even though it's a great matchup for someone like Robbie Anderson, it's very likely he could disappoint due to the erratic play of Sam Darnold himself. He's still ranked as a flex, a high upside flex, yes, but also one with a very, very low floor. We have Crowder ranked just behind him, so he's in a similar case. With him though, his floor is a bit higher, ceiling's a bit lower, but that's kind of the trade-off you're going to get with those 2 players. For the Giants, Sterling Shepard's been ruled out again, and it's starting to become a big question on when he's coming back, if any time this year. They haven't put him on IR, but it's going to leave Golden Tate, Darius Slayton, and Benny Fowler in most 3 wide receiver sets. Golden Tate's been playing well. He's a top 20 option this week. Starting him as a wide receiver 2, you can feel comfortable doing that. He's likely going to see an uptick in volume with Evan Engram, who's also out. Trusting the other wide receivers though in this matchup, it's going to be a little tough. Darius Slayton's going to be your best bet. We still have him ranked outside of flex territory, so if you are making that judgment call, it's one that has a lot of risk and not a ton of upside, but you could obviously do worse. The next matchup we have should have a lot of fireworks. It is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Arizona Cardinals. Both offenses that can really get it going in the passing game, both defenses that allow a lot of production to fantasy wide receivers. So a really good spot here for players like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, both of which obviously top 5 this week. If you have them, make sure to get them in your lineup, that's for sure. Christian Kirk is going to be the highest ranked receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. He comes in just outside the top 15. He showed just how much they want to get him involved in this offense. He had a rush last week. The week before that, he had 11 targets versus the Saints. So considering Larry Fitzgerald has disappointed us in matchups in which he had to be the only wide receiver option on the field, Christian Kirk is a lone bright spot here, and you should definitely start him as so. The aforementioned Larry Fitzgerald, he's still a flex, don't get us wrong, but he's been one that's disappointed us in better spots, and obviously you can't trust him as far as you can throw him in this one. So if you do start other players over him, we definitely can't blame you. Miami Dolphins versus the Indianapolis Colts, and the big news here is probably Zach Pascal, who is now on everybody's radar and should be for good reason. He's 100% a start this week. Even though the Indianapolis Colts are favored by 11, it's still the Miami Dolphins, who have no defense when it comes to protecting the pass. No real defense when it comes to protecting the run either, but Pascal is definitely going to be the top option in the receiving game for the Colts. He's taking over most of the work that is left behind by T.Y. Hilton in his absence, so if you have him, you can definitely put him in. We have him as a top 30 option this week. No real other receiver outside of that we're thrilled about putting in. For the Miami side of things, you basically have Devontae Parker, who could be a start this week. Remember, we have garbage time coming on, and Devontae Parker is the top option in the passing game, so a decent game by him is a realistic outcome, so you can feel comfortable putting him in at the flex. But really, outside of Parker, outside of Pascal, it's really getting thin out there, so don't really try to force any of these other receivers into your lineups. The next matchup we have is the Panthers versus the Green Bay Packers. Biggest news here, Davante Adams should be returning once again, a bit more healthy than he was last week. In Vegas, they expect a decent amount of offense. It has a 47-point projected point total. It is in Green Bay. Green Bay's favored by 5.5, but we're expecting a much better performance from Adams in his second game back. Yeah, he was only able to put together 41 yards, but it was against the Chargers, who aren't the greatest on defense, but if they were strong in one area, they are good against opposing wide receivers at times. Carolina as well is third in DVOA against the pass, so it's not going to be a soft matchup, but presumably better in health. We could expect better performance, so we're still starting him with confidence this week. The volume's there. He had 11 targets last week, leading all Packers receivers, so there's no reason to expect that's going to change whatsoever. So if you have him, put him in. On the Carolina side, pretty simple. DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, they're back in wide receiver twos. In a matchup where Green Bay should be pushing them for offensive production, they find themselves in a really good spot here. The next matchup we have is the Los Angeles Rams versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. This one's going to be in Pittsburgh. The Rams are favored by 3.5. It's only a 44-point over-under, and there's not going to be any Brandon Cooks. He is out, which presumably leads for more opportunities for Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, and now Josh Reynolds as well. It's not like Brandon Cooks left a ton of production on the field. He wasn't performing all that well prior to leaving with the injury, so don't expect massive bumps up in production for these players. Josh Reynolds, of course, just seeing the field more often is going to lead to more opportunities, but Cooper Kupp, he's going to be your main guy. He's a top 10 option this week. Robert Woods is trailing behind. He's going to be nothing more than about a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. Obviously, there's some upside in that start though, and for Josh Reynolds, you should probably leave him on the bench this week. While he will have more opportunity, it's unlikely that this is going to be the matchup in which he completely goes off. On the Pittsburgh side of things, you have Juju Smith-Schuster. He had a really disappointing week last week, catching just 3 of 5 targets for 16 yards, but he did drop a really deep ball that could have changed his fantasy day for sure. We still have him ranked as a wide receiver 2, and outside of that, there's really no wide receivers on the Pittsburgh side that you're interested in starting or should be interested in starting. In the final matchup of Sunday, we have the Minnesota Vikings versus the Dallas Cowboys. Dallas is at home. It's a 48.5 point projected point total, so there are going to be some touchdowns to go around. Minnesota, they're no slouch in the pass game when it comes to defense, so this isn't going to be projected to be one of Amari Cooper's best games or Michael Gallup's best games, but we have seen them allow a lot of production of wide receiver 2s, including a massive game from Marvin Jones, who plays a similar role to Michael Gallup in this offense. So for that, Gallup's just outside the top 20. Amari Cooper, he's a wide receiver 1, no question about that. On the Minnesota side of things, Adam Thielen, he's already been ruled out, so that leaves Stephon Diggs up for a lot more opportunity in this matchup versus the Cowboys. The Cowboys, they don't make a lot of mistakes on defense, so a huge game from Stephon Diggs is not very likely. He's still a wide receiver 2, don't get us wrong, but expecting the increase in targets and increase in production to result in high-end wide receiver 1 production, it's just more unlikely than it is likely. And while there are other receivers like Johnson or Treadwell on this offense, we're not putting our faith in either of those guys. So if you're starting anyone, you're starting Diggs, and that is it. One final matchup we have, it's the Monday night matchup, Seattle Seahawks versus the San Francisco 49ers. Seattle's going to be on the road at this one. San Francisco, 6-point favorite, 47-point projected point total. And Emmanuel Sanders, he's going to be the guy that you're going to want to start on the 49ers side of things. Seattle has been giving it up to wide receivers all season long, and they've shown that they can keep putting up the points to keep these games competitive and keep the passing game a factor throughout the fourth quarter. For that reason, Emmanuel Sanders, we have him ranked as a top 15 guy. No other receiver we have ranked inside the top 40, at least on the San Francisco side of things. For Seattle, though, it's a different story. Keep in mind, though, this pass defense is one of the best in the league. This defense overall is one of the best in the league. So Tyler Lockett, he's still a back-end wide receiver 1, but don't be expecting a game like we saw against Tampa Bay. So that leaves DK Metcalf, who's been a good outlet for this offense, especially in the red zone. If you want to start him, putting him in the flex, not a bad idea idea. And then that just leaves Josh Gordon, who has recently signed to the team and could make his debut on Monday. While he is still making his debut, it's unlikely that he's going to be in any sort of featured role, so leave him on the bench, stash him as an upside play, but nothing much more than that. And with that though, guys, we just went through every matchup. That is the wide receivers. Again, if you're still unsure who to start between two players, utilize the rankings available on our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. The link for that's in the description box below. But if you did enjoy this video, please hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.